Something unusual is happening in American politics, and it's making Democrats increasingly uneasy. Across several key states, new polling, shifting voter priorities, and a series of difficult political debates are creating challenges that many strategists didn't expect to be this persistent. While it's far too early to predict the outcome of the next national election, one thing is becoming clear. Both major parties are entering a period of intense competition. For Democrats, the questions are growing louder. Can they hold together the coalition that delivered recent victories? Will economic concerns outweigh other issues for voters? And are independent voters beginning to rethink what matters most when they head to the ballot box? Today's story isn't about one headline or one speech. It's about a broader political trend that could shape the months ahead and why both Democrats and Republicans are paying such close attention. Welcome back. In today's video, we're taking a closer look at why many political analysts believe Democrats are entering one of the most challenging periods of this election cycle. We'll examine what recent polling suggests, how voter priorities appear to be shifting, and why campaign strategies are evolving on both sides. Rather than focusing on a single dramatic moment, we'll explore the larger political picture. Elections are rarely decided by one event. More often, they're influenced by months of changing public opinion, economic conditions, campaign messaging, and voter turnout. By the end of this video, you'll have a clearer understanding of the factors shaping the current political landscape and why the coming months could be especially important for both parties. American politics changes quickly. Only a few years ago, many observers believed certain electoral coalitions had become relatively stable, but history shows that voter preferences are constantly evolving. Concerns that dominate one election can become less influential by the next, while entirely new issues rise to the forefront. Recent surveys suggest many voters remain focused on everyday concerns such as inflation, the cost of housing, healthcare affordability, wages, and public safety. While these issues affect Americans across the political spectrum, they also influence how voters evaluate the performance of elected leaders. Political campaigns understand this well. That's why both parties have increasingly centered their messaging around economic security, affordability, and quality of life. Instead of assuming that previous campaign themes will resonate in exactly the same way, strategists are adjusting their approaches to reflect what voters say matters most today. For Democrats, this creates both opportunities and challenges. Incumbent parties often receive credit when conditions improve, but they can also face criticism when many voters continue to feel financial pressure, even if broader economic indicators appear strong. Political professionals rarely focus on a single poll. Instead, they watch for consistent patterns over time. When multiple surveys begin showing similar movement among independent voters, younger voters, suburban communities, or key demographic groups, campaigns start asking an important question. Is this a temporary fluctuation or the beginning of a larger trend? Several analysts have pointed out that recent polling has highlighted competitive races in states expected to play major roles in future elections. While individual polls can differ significantly, campaigns often look at polling averages, turnout history, fundraising, and voter registration trends together before making strategic decisions. That explains why both parties continue investing heavily in advertising, grassroots organizing, and voter outreach months before many ballots are cast. Neither side appears willing to assume the outcome is already decided, and that's often a sign that political professionals believe the race could remain highly competitive. But polling is only one piece of the puzzle. Numbers can reveal trends, but they don't always explain why voters are changing their minds. In the next section, we'll examine the key issues dominating voter conversations, explore where Democrats face their toughest political tests, and look at how Republicans are trying to capitalize on those concerns. Let's dive deeper. If you ask political strategists what wins elections, many will give the same answer. It's not always about the loudest headline, it's about the issue people think about when they walk into the voting booth. Right now, voters across the country are weighing several concerns at once. The economy remains a central topic, but it's far from the only one. Housing affordability, healthcare costs, immigration, public safety, education, and the national debt continue to shape conversations in communities across the United States. What's important to remember is that different groups often rank these priorities differently. Younger voters may emphasize housing costs or student debt, while older voters may focus more on healthcare or retirement security. Independent voters often evaluate candidates based on a mix of economic performance and leadership qualities. This creates a complicated environment for both parties. Instead of speaking to one unified audience, campaigns must communicate with millions of voters who have different priorities and different expectations. For Democrats, one of the biggest strategic questions is how to keep together a broad coalition of voters. Recent election victories have depended on support from urban voters, suburban communities, younger Americans, minority groups, labor organizations, and many independents. That's a diverse coalition, and maintaining that level of support over multiple election cycles is never easy. Political analysts often point out that governing and campaigning require different skills. When a party is in office, voters tend to judge it based on results. Some may feel optimistic about economic indicators or job growth, while others focus on their own day-to-day experiences, such as grocery bills, rent, or utility costs. Those personal experiences can influence voting decisions just as much as national statistics. As a result, Democratic candidates face the task of explaining their record, while also convincing voters that their proposals address current concerns. Republicans, meanwhile, have been working to frame the election around issues where they believe they have an advantage. Campaign speeches, advertisements, and interviews frequently emphasize affordability, border security, energy policy, and government spending. Whether those messages persuade voters depends on many factors, including local issues, candidate quality, and the broader political climate. But from a strategic standpoint, Republicans appear determined to keep attention focused on areas where they believe swing voters are especially engaged. That doesn't guarantee success. Elections are influenced by turnout, campaign organization, debates, fundraising, and unexpected events. Still, political observers note that both parties are carefully adjusting their messaging based on changing voter priorities rather than relying solely on past campaign strategies. One group continues to attract enormous attention: independent voters. Unlike reliable Democratic or Republican supporters, independents often make decisions later in the campaign and can shift between parties from one election to another. Because many battleground states are decided by relatively small margins, even modest changes among independent voters can have an outsized impact. Campaigns know this. That's why you'll often hear messages aimed not just at energizing loyal supporters, but also at persuading voters who haven't fully made up their minds. As the election season progresses, both parties are likely to spend significant time and resources trying to connect with this critical group. But elections aren't won only through messaging. Campaigns also need resources, organization, volunteers, and strong candidates. And that's where the next chapter of this story becomes especially interesting. Most people see campaign rallies, televised debates, and political advertisements. What they don't always see is the months of planning happening behind the scenes. Modern campaigns are massive operations involving fundraising teams, field organizers, volunteer networks, policy advisors, communications specialists, and data analysts. Every decision, from where a candidate travels to which television markets receive advertising, is based on research and strategy. Winning elections often depends as much on organization as on messaging. Every election cycle, attention shifts toward a relatively small number of competitive states. These battleground states receive more campaign visits, more advertising, and more media coverage because they're expected to play an important role in determining the outcome. Candidates spend considerable time meeting local voters, discussing regional concerns, and tailoring messages to issues that matter most in those communities. For voters living there, campaign season can feel especially intense. Television commercials, Digital ads, mailers, and public appearances become increasingly frequent as election day approaches. Campaigns require significant financial resources. Money supports advertising, travel, staffing, voter outreach, and technology. Both major parties devote substantial effort to building fundraising operations, and reports on campaign fundraising often receive close attention because they can offer insight into organizational strength. However, fundraising totals don't automatically predict election outcomes. History includes many examples where well-funded candidates lost competitive races, while others with fewer resources exceeded expectations through strong grassroots support or effective campaign strategies. Ultimately, fundraising is just one indicator among many. Political momentum is rarely permanent. A strong debate performance, a major policy announcement, an unexpected news event, or changing economic conditions can reshape the conversation within days. That's why experienced analysts often avoid making confident predictions too early. Campaigns themselves operate with the same mindset. They continuously review polling, voter feedback, advertising performance, and local political developments, adjusting their strategies as new information becomes available. Flexibility is often one of the most valuable assets in a long campaign. As the campaign season continues, both Democrats and Republicans face important decisions. How should they prioritize resources? Which messages resonate most with undecided voters? Where should candidates spend their time? And perhaps most importantly, what issues will matter most to Americans by the time ballots are cast? Those questions remain open, and the answers may shape not only the election itself, but also the direction of national politics in the years ahead. So where could this race ultimately be decided? In the next chapter, we'll examine the key battlegrounds, the demographic shifts analysts are watching, and why a handful of closely contested states could once again determine the outcome of the election. Every presidential election follows a familiar pattern. As election day gets closer, the national conversation often narrows to a relatively small number of highly competitive states. While candidates campaign across the country, strategists know that only a handful of battlegrounds may ultimately determine who wins the White House. That's why you'll often see candidates making repeated visits to the same locations. It's not because other states don't matter, it's because campaigns are trying to persuade the voters who could have the greatest impact on the final result. In these states, every campaign stop, television interview, policy announcement, and local endorsement is carefully planned. Margins are often extremely close, and in competitive elections, even small shifts in voter turnout or independent support can make a meaningful difference. One mistake people sometimes make is assuming every voter is focused on the same national debate. In reality, local concerns often carry just as much weight. In one state, manufacturing jobs may dominate campaign discussions. In another, agriculture, energy production, housing affordability, or water resources might be the top concern. Successful campaigns recognize these differences. Instead of delivering exactly the same speech everywhere, candidates frequently adapt their message to reflect regional priorities while maintaining their broader national platform. Political consultants often describe this as meeting voters where they are. It's one reason campaign schedules become increasingly strategic during the final months before an election. Another reason analysts are watching this election so closely is that the American electorate continues to evolve. Communities are growing, populations are shifting, and voting patterns can change over time. Suburban areas, for example, have become increasingly important in many competitive races. Young voters continue to represent a significant part of the electorate, while older Americans remain among the most consistent participants on Election Day. At the same time, campaigns are paying close attention to independent voters and communities that have shown changing political preferences in recent elections. Rather than assuming traditional voting patterns will continue unchanged, both parties are investing heavily in research to better understand how different groups are thinking about the issues. One of the biggest lessons from recent election cycles is that expectations don't always match results. Throughout modern political history, There have been races where polls underestimated one candidate's support, and others where polling proved remarkably accurate. That's why experienced analysts usually avoid making absolute predictions months before votes are counted. Campaigns themselves tend to focus less on headlines and more on the fundamentals: building volunteer networks, encouraging voter registration, expanding grassroots outreach, raising campaign funds, refining messaging, increasing voter turnout. Those behind-the-scenes efforts often matter just as much as the public moments that dominate television coverage. Despite the strong rhetoric often seen in political advertising and cable news discussions, the broader reality is that both major parties continue to see paths to victory. Democrats argue that their policy priorities and governing record will resonate with voters who value stability, economic investment, and protecting key programs. Republicans argue that concerns about affordability, immigration, government spending, and economic confidence create an opportunity to persuade voters looking for a different direction. Ultimately, the decision won't be made by campaign slogans alone. It will be made by millions of Americans evaluating the issues they believe matter most to their families and communities. And until those votes are cast, both parties are likely to continue adapting their strategies in response to changing political conditions. So, is this truly the defining political challenge Democrats face, or simply another difficult chapter in America's constantly changing electoral landscape? The answer won't come from a single poll or a single campaign rally. In our final section, we'll look at the bigger picture, explore what both parties still need to accomplish, and discuss why the coming months could be some of the most consequential in recent political history. If there's one lesson from modern American elections, it's this: the political landscape can change quickly. A strong debate performance, a major policy proposal, an unexpected economic report, or a significant international event can all influence the direction of a campaign. That's why experienced strategists avoid assuming today's political environment will look the same a few months from now. For Democrats, the challenge is maintaining support across a broad coalition while persuading undecided voters that their policies address the issues people care about most. For Republicans, the challenge is converting voter frustration into electoral support while presenting a governing agenda that appeals beyond their core base. Neither task is simple. As Election Day draws closer, campaigns typically intensify their efforts. Voters can expect more campaign rallies and town halls, increased television and digital advertising, more candidate interviews and policy speeches, greater emphasis on voter registration and turnout, heightened attention to battleground states. Behind the scenes, campaign teams continuously analyze polling, fundraising, volunteer engagement, and voter feedback to refine their strategies. Every appearance, advertisement, and policy announcement is designed with one goal in mind: persuading voters in the places that matter most. Political headlines often use dramatic language, suggesting one side has all the momentum or that the outcome is already inevitable. History tells a different story. Many elections that appeared predictable months in advance ultimately proved highly competitive. Public opinion shifts, turnout varies, and late-breaking events can influence how voters make their final decisions. That's why analysts typically focus on long-term trends rather than isolated moments. A single poll rarely determines the direction of a race. Instead, campaigns look for consistent patterns across multiple surveys, voter engagement, and on-the-ground organizing. Beyond campaign strategy, this election reflects a broader conversation about the country's future. Voters are weighing questions about economic opportunity, public finances, healthcare, immigration, national security, education, the role of government. Different voters will prioritize these issues differently, and that's one reason national elections remain so competitive. In a country as large and diverse as the United States, there is rarely a single issue that decides everything. Instead, millions of individual decisions combine to shape the final result. Whether Democrats overcome these challenges or Republicans successfully capitalize on them will ultimately depend on the choices voters make, not on headlines alone. The months ahead are likely to bring new debates, fresh polling, evolving campaign strategies, and unexpected developments. Until then, one thing remains certain: American politics continues to evolve, and both major parties are adapting to a rapidly changing political landscape. What happens next won't be decided by one speech, one interview, or one viral moment. It will be decided over time through campaigning, public debate, and ultimately at the ballot box. What do you think? Are the current political trends likely to continue, or do you expect the race to shift again before Election Day? Share your perspective in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this balanced political analysis, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest coverage of U.S. politics, elections, and the stories shaping Washington. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.